This is the type of airplane we're going to teach you how to build. It's a Speed Deamon by J&H Aerospace that's modified specifically for the Speedfest contest. Now I've got it painted here in a really simple spray paint job. You see, did this in about 5 minutes, two-tone color. So you can really get creative with this. I just wanted to be able to show you that you don't have to be an artist to be able to do this. You can paint it high visibility for your pilot to be able to see with just simple spray paint. Usually the rule of thumb for airplane visibility is to paint the bottom a dark color and the top a bright color. You see the airplane here has the main wing, the tail, which consists of the vertical stabilizer, the horizontal stabilizer. This is the elevator. You've got 2 ailerons on this airplane. Here's the electric motor. It's on the outside of the airplane for cooling. Propeller, of course, spinner nut. Notice on the side here, this is the connector for the electronic speed controller. I've actually got this glued to the side of the airplane, so it's rigid. This is the connector for the battery. And so by doing it this way, you actually have a safe way to connect and disconnect the battery without getting inside and worrying about getting your arm across this propeller. Treat this propeller with a great deal of respect. It's basically a spinning knife. We call it a meat grinder, okay? One of the dangers of electric propulsion systems is that they can just take off on their own. So you always want to respect the plane of the propeller, okay? No matter what, even if it's disconnected, if you're holding the airplane, always hold it so that no part of you is crossing the plane of the propeller, and certainly it's not near anyone else. When you want to plug this battery in, it just slides into the connector here. This airplane has a simple hatch. Battery is right here, connected to the bottom of the airplane with Velcro. So you can easily pop that out and put in a fresh battery, or you can just charge the battery through this lead, however you'd like to do that. Back here, you will see when we go through this build, I modified the exhaust. This basically is the exhaust for where air can get out from the hot speed controller. You want to make sure that the speed controller can stay cool, so that heat's got to be able to get out. Well, actually made this a little bit large so we could get the receiver inside here that allows you to connect to the transmitter so your pilot can control the airplane. If we look at the bottom of the airplane, it may look really shiny to you here. This is where I put the packing tape. What this packing tape does is protect the bottom of the airplane so that when you're repeatedly landing on grass, it doesn't tear up the bottom of the airplane. You see I've got aileron servos, port side, starboard side, and I've got them recessed in here. I actually cut the foam out so that I could recess them to reduce the drag. These are the control rods to the aileron control horns. One thing I did on this airplane that you can do, but you don't have to, when I show you the build, I'm going to show you the simpler way to do it. You can sort of see that I cut out the fuselage and submerged the wing partway into the fuselage. Reduces a little bit of drag. Not absolutely necessary, but we do allow modifications to these kits. Look at different parts of the airplane. There's a better close-up of the motor and how it's connected to the firewall. Go to the back of the airplane. You can see here, that's where the elevator control horn is. Since we're talking about controls, don't ever grab the control and push on it and move the servo. Sometimes people do that, but you can strip out the gears on your servos. So the only way you should move the control surfaces is with the radio. And we'll show you how to do that later. So with that, we'll begin the process of constructing this kit so you can do it yourself. These are the tools that you're going to need to build your airplane kit. Heavy-duty glue gun, glue sticks, some sort of craft knife. There are two different types here. This is a box blade type, and this is, we call them X-Acto types. We provide this X-Acto type to different teams, but you can use this type if you prefer. Phillips screwdrivers. This is a number 2. This is a number 0. Most of the screws in the kits and the servo and so forth, servos will be a number 0 type. This is a heavy-duty cable cutter. This is used primarily to cut the control linkages in your airplane. This is a 1.5 millimeter hex key. We pretty much just use this to tighten your prop nut on. This is a packing tape. This is a square. Yes, I know it's a triangle, but the type of tool it is a square. We use it to square up the foam parts, make sure they're perpendicular to each other. We have a cut resistant mat here. This is nice to protect your table from the glue and also from the blades. And then finally, this is a tool that we've made ourselves just for this purpose. It's a beveling tool. It consists of a 3D printed part, a housing that holds a single edge razor blade that you can replace just by taking out these screws. Most important thing here is to make sure that you use a new single edge razor blade before you start your kit, because they can dull pretty quickly. What I like to do is just put it into a piece of scrap foam like this, and then you'll make sure you don't cut yourself with it when it's just sitting on the table. Let's talk about some tips and tricks when using foam. First thing we'll talk about is with regard to glue sticks. You notice here, this glue gun actually has glue in it, but the stick is just inside of the inlet, and this glue stick won't stay in place. Sometimes this becomes a problem because you're in the middle of gluing something and you can't get that new stick to stay in place, and you need to make a big long continuous bead of glue and this stick keeps falling out. It's a real simple trick for this. You simply take the end of the glue stick, put a small bead of glue on it, and then put it inside, hold it in place for a few seconds. And now that glue stick is fused together with the one inside the gun, and so you won't have a problem with it falling out anymore. Next thing you'll want to do is make sure you've cut some scraps. Keep scraps of foam, cardboard, paper, so forth around your work area, because you're going to be needing to scrape off excess glue. And so it's nice to have these around. You'll have a lot of scrap left over when you're taking your parts out. So that's a helpful tip for you. when it comes to cutting out your parts, this is not your kit. This is some scrap left over from a kit I did a while ago. But you'll notice when your parts are inside of the protective part of the foam, they're not completely cut out yet, and there's these little tabs all the way around. Okay, what you're going to want to do is carefully cut those out. Don't just pull your parts out, because sometimes what it will do is it will pull the paper right off your foam. So go all the way around and gently cut out these pieces. You're going to notice they're on both sides. So go around and cut them out all the way around on both sides. Once you've gone around on both sides of the foam, the parts will come out much easier. You still need to be careful with it so you don't bend the foam or tear the paper. Now, oftentimes in kits, what you'll see is that there are some pre-cut parts of the foam. In this case, you see there are lines here, 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 and here. These are supposed to be places where that foam is supposed to be removed so that you can fold the sides of this part up against the bottom. Sometimes these cuts won't be quite deep enough. So what you can do is just very gently score them with your knife, but don't go all the way through, because if you go all the way through and cut the paper, then you're going to have to tape this part back together. Once you do that, then you can gently break over the parts like this. And then you can start to peel back the parts that you're supposed to remove. So you can see this part here. Now this one, I purposely left it so it wasn't scored completely through. And you'll notice that there's a little bit of foam left. You can kind of see it. There are little bits of foam. We need to scrape that out. Now you don't want to cut it. What you want to do, you can do this a variety of different ways. You could even do it with an end of a screwdriver or something. But if you're careful, you can use the end of a knife, or really just kind of the side of the knife, even the back of the knife. And all we're going to do is just scrape off this excess foam. Scrape that excess foam off of the paper. And now you see we have a clean edge. And that allows us to fold this part over. Now for gluing. Hot glue out of this type of gun usually has a working time of no more than 30 seconds. So you're going to want to work quickly. If you start taking longer than 30 seconds and the glue hardens, then you're going to be in trouble. You may have to try to cut the glue out. So have a plan beforehand. Think about what you're going to do beforehand. You know, you'll see me as we build the kit. We dry fit everything. We test the folds and everything before we glue, because once we glue it, it's semi-permanent. So this type of fold I'm going to make here is something called a B-fold. All that means is that this side folds up against the bottom side. So it looks like this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is put some glue on the side that we're going to fold up against. And usually I don't start at the very end, because that glue will ooze out. And I don't stop at the end, because same thing will happen at this end. Usually start maybe about a 1/2 inch in or so, and stop about a 1/2 inch before the end. And you're not going to need as much glue as you might think. This is something I've learned over time. I always seem to use too much, and then I need to scrape it out. So go ahead and get the glue started, and then run a small bead across here. You'll notice I stopped about a 1/2 inch or so before the end, and then I fold this side up. And now what's important is for you to use that squaring tool. You notice I'm holding this triangle up against the side, and I can also, if there is a little bit of excess, so kind of almost need an extra pair of hands here, you can scrape the inside with some of your scrap foam or cardboard. And so now you'll get a nice clean edge. And we sit here and hold this for about 30 seconds or more. Sometimes you need to hold it even longer if you're doing something that takes a lot of glue. That happens usually when you're making wing spars or something like that, some big structural part that takes a lot of glue. The glue will take longer to harden, because there's a lot of glue, and so it keeps itself hot. But you can see everything is nice and square. Now I have a nice clean edge. I didn't get any glue oozing out either end, and I got a nice strong structural part. Here's how you use your bevel tool. Make sure you have a new blade in here and that the screws are down tight. Grab the bevel tool so that your thumb is pressing on the blade, and then your forefinger is on this end. You see this edge right here? This is the guide edge. If you keep this guide edge along the edge of the foam, you can pretty much guarantee you're going to get a perfect depth 45-degree angle bevel on your piece of foam, as long as that foam has got a nice clean edge here. So you see, I'll take this point here, put it where I want to start the cut, line it up right with the edge, and then pressing down, I gently guide that edge right along the edge of the foam. Sorry if you can't see that. And there's our 45-degree bevel. This is really nice to be able to do when you're cutting control surfaces, because this blade won't go deep enough. You can see here, it goes deep enough to cut the foam, but it won't go deep enough to cut through the bottom piece of paper. And for when you're making your control surfaces, you need that bottom piece of paper to stay on there to make sure that you're not cutting away the control. Let's set up the avionics for your airplane. We're going to do this now, even before we build the airplane, so that you can use your transmitter and your receiver to zero your servos. You won't need any special equipment to zero your servos. They'll be ready to install when you complete a certain part of the airplane. And once we get the airplane all finished, then we'll go ahead and tune everything to make sure your control deflections are correct. You notice what I have here is the equipment that we provide to many of the teams in Speedfest, but you are not required to have these exact components. This is a T6L Sport Futaba transmitter. It's a 6-channel transmitter, 3 servos. What come with the servo is some associated horns and also some hardware. This is a Futaba R3106GF receiver. This comes with that transmitter. This is a Y splitter, allows you to use 2 servos controlled by 1 channel. We use this on the aileron. This is your battery. This one is an 850 milliamp hour 2S battery, 7.4 volt LiPo. It's got an XT30 connector on it. And this is your electronic speed controller. This is what provides the power to the motor and the commutation to the motor to make it spin. It also provides power to all of your servos and your receiver because it's got a what's called a BEC or battery eliminator circuit in it. Basically, it's just a voltage regulator. And so what it'll do is take some of the power of this battery and send it out to the Avionics. So a couple things to keep in mind here before we start. One thing is, notice on this receiver, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but I've marked myself the polarity of these connectors. You notice that every single type of connector that goes in this receiver has 3 wires. In this case, it's black, red, and yellow. Sometimes they're black, red, and white, or black, or brown, red, white. Just depends on the manufacturer. But polarity is important here. So I've marked it on this. You see the outer pin is negative, so that's the ground. The middle pin, the red one, is positive, and the signal is the yellow in this case. So the black on this receiver, the black is always going to go on the outside of the case. The other thing to keep in mind is when you plug things in, and especially when you unplug from a receiver, don't grab the wires. A lot of times people will just grab the wire and pull the connector out of the receiver. What that can do is actually disconnect the pin inside this connector, and you'll get intermittent connections and you can get a crashed airplane. So don't do that. Every receiver has a channel map, and that just shows you what function is controlled by the different channels accessed by the receiver. On this Futaba, channel 1 is going to control ailerons, channel 2 elevator, channel 3 electronic speed controller, which is your throttle. And then we're not going to use 4, 5, and 6. So let's go ahead and plug the different servos into the channels of this receiver. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the aileron channel. That's channel 1. Well, I'm going to control both ailerons from the same channel, so I need this splitter. You don't have to do it this way. Your receiver and your transmitter may actually allow you to set up the ailerons independently. But this is another simple way to do it. So we're going to put, you notice the black wire on my right on the outside of the case. I'm going to plug it in to channel 1. And then I'm going to go ahead and plug one of the servos into channel 2. That's the elevator. What I like to do here is just start it, and then I can kind of push down with my fingernails, get it flush with the other connector. Now plug the 2 servos. Let's say this is the starboard side aileron. Once again, watch polarity, black to black. Make sure that connector is all the way in. black to black. Make sure this connector is all the way in. So all three receivers are now connected. I'm sorry, all three servos are now connected into the receiver. And the final connection is going to be the electronic speed controller. This speed controller has several wires coming out of it. These three wires provide commutation to the motor. We're not setting that up now. We'll do that later. I'll show you that. This is power. So plus, minus, this connects to the battery. And then this is what connects to your receiver. You have a fourth wire on here that's used for a different purpose that we're not going to use. So this wire will just stay unconnected. But you'll notice black, red, and white. So into channel 3. Black is on the outside again. Press it in, and now we're ready to begin. Your receiver should already come bound or linked to your transmitter in the case of the T6L, but just in case you get a new one, show you how to do the linking or bindings, as some people call it, procedure. On the Futaba, what you do, you can clearly see it in the manual as well. You hold the sticks, both sticks, down and to the inside. Hold them like that with one hand. Turn the transmitter on. You'll notice it's blinking. And then come over here and plug in the battery to the speed controller. You'll notice this light on the receiver is flashing. And then it turns green, and now it's linked. You'll be able to see, there are my ailerons. You can see the aileron servos turning, my elevator turning. You won't be able to see anything on the throttle channel because we don't have the motor set up. Okay, so one other thing, since we're going to use the transmitter right now to zero the servos, we want to make sure that these trim settings, they're called, are in the middle. So in other words, you see this little slider that can go back and forth. That allows you to fine tune the position of the servo. We want those in the middle. See, same thing here for the elevator. We want that in the middle. There's a little detent you can feel. You put them right in the middle, and now anytime that servo is powered on, it's in its zero or centered condition. So now what we can do is take these horns off that we're not going to use, put the new horns on that we are going to use, and make sure that they're in the right position. You'll notice what comes in the package for these servos are 3 different types of horns. There's a really long one. There's a middle-sized one that's kind of thick, and then there's the smallest one that's really skinny. We're not going to use the long one, and we're not going to use this middle one. Okay, for all 3 servos, we're going to use this type of horn, and we're actually only going to use one side of it. So what we need to do is take a knife, and you can place it right up against the outside of this servo horn, and you can just cut one side off and it'll just pop right off. And so you see here we have a horn with one arm. Okay, we're going to do this to all of the middle size horns for each one of these servos, and then we're going to replace these existing horns. Now to replace these, you're going to use your 0 size Phillips that comes that we provide. It's your smallest Phillips. Hold on to the horn, and you see this small little Phillips size screw in the middle here. I'm going to press down on that. Gently remove it. And then pop this servo horn off. Okay? We're going to go ahead and put on these other horns that we've been cutting to size, but I'm going to go ahead and remove the horns on these other two servos off camera. Okay, I have the old horns off and the new horns cut, and you'll notice I have the 3 servos here. These 2 servos, these 2 are the ailerons, and this one is the elevator. Okay, I need to make sure that these servos are centered now, because when I removed the old horns, I had everything off and I might have shifted the servo a little bit. So let me go ahead and turn on the transmitter and plug in the receiver. You can hear the servos moved a little bit. You can just make sure that they're operating. And so the torque will hold them in place while we do this. So all of the trim tabs are zeroed out. So I can actually put these horns on and not worry about them shifting. Now, if you look at the orientation of this servo here, so with the wire facing this way and the label of the servo away from me, I want to have this horn off 90 degrees on this side. Now, sometimes you'll notice, because the resolution on the spline is not that fine, so you might not be able to get it exactly. You see this, I can't quite get it exactly 90 degrees, but get it as close as you can, and then push the horn on. Okay, you'll see that there won't be a gap anymore. You won't see the white of the servo spline. Okay, for the ailerons, I just need to make sure that they are opposite each other. Once again, they're going to be 90, 190 on this side, and 190 on this other side. You see that I pressed that servo on, or servo horn on. I'm not seeing any white. You can see the 2 horns are opposite each other. You might be wondering at this point, well, is this one port and starboard, or does it matter? It will matter, but we're not going to worry about it now, because if we happen to put them in on the wrong side, or if if you connect these 2 wires opposite of me, it won't matter, because we can reverse them inside the radio, and I'll show you how to do that later. But now let's check, make sure all those horns are moving. And there's the elevator. Okay, the last thing to do is go ahead and put these screws back in. And they're really small screws, so they're kind of difficult. What's nice is that these screwdrivers that we provide, usually they give you pretty good grip. And you put those into the spline, make sure you don't cross thread them. Now, what you don't want to do is provide torque against the servo, because you can damage a servo. You never want to force a servo to move. So what I like to do is hold the horn in one hand, and in fact, at this point, it's a good idea. Let's go ahead and unplug the servos, turn off the transmitter. And what I like to do is hold the horn in between my fingers as I screw it in. And it just needs to be finger tight. You don't need to bear down on it. But you notice, your screwdriver is going to try to torque that servo horn, so you need to hold it in place. But like I said, just finger tight, doesn't need to be very tight. And that's all there is to it, to zeroing your servos. I'm going to go ahead and do the remaining 2 off camera. Okay, let's build a wing. The tools that you're going to need are your hot glue gun, heated up and ready to go, your beveling tool, your knife, and some scrap foam to be able to scrape off some of the glue. And the parts you'll need for this part of the build, here's the wing. This is called the shear web. This is the carbon fiber spar tube. A couple of control rods. It's your control surface horns. And there's a little rectangular piece that goes onto the back end of the wing. First thing you need to do is cut out the rectangular spots for the servos, and also this circular spot for where the servo cable goes. And you see there are these uncut tabs on the back. And so what you need to do is work your way around carefully and cut out those tabs on both sides. And I'll check on the other side. And it cut through, and there you go. So do that for these 2 remaining parts. Once you've cut out those parts, go ahead and save them because you can use them to scrape off excess glue. So the next step is going to be to bevel the inside of the leading edge of this wing. So you notice that this wing has a cut right here. It's only on one side, and so the wing can fold over like this, okay? So this is the leading edge of the wing, and it's going to be on the inside. So we need to be able to bevel both sides so the wing can fold over on itself. So what you're going to do is use your beveling tool, and we're going to bevel this side, which is going to be the bottom of the wing, all the way across. So from here to here. And then we're going to do the same on the other side, all the way across the leading edge. Now, if you haven't had a chance to practice with your bevel tool yet, I recommend you do that. In an earlier part of the video, we showed you how to use this tool. But what I'd recommend now is, if you haven't had a chance to practice, go ahead and do that on some scrap foam, because it may save you from having to redo your wing. Okay, I've got the wing set up in a comfortable position for me, and I'm going to go ahead and do the bottom side first. So just like I told you in the other part of the video, I line up the bevel guide right here, press down on the bevel tool, and then just slowly cut all the way across. And if you've got a fresh blade in here, as we recommended, it's going to cut really easily. Keep pressing till it goes all the way through. And there you go. It's a really nice bevel on one side, all the way across. Okay, and the bevel goes all the way down almost to the paper. Now we're going to flip the wing and do the exact same thing. This side's a little bit trickier because I need to plunge the blade into this part where the bevel starts. But that's okay, I just push the blade in, line up this leading edge, And once again, drag all the way across. Move this in so you can see the whole process. Take your time on this. Let the bevel tool do the work. Your eyes should be focused on this edge, making sure that you're on that line or just on the inside of it. Okay. Now I need to finish out these cuts here to get that foam piece out. Take it all the way down to this end here. Cut that piece out. And there we go. We have a bevel on both sides. What that bevel is intended to do is make it easier for this wing to fold over on itself, like this. This next step is what I consider to be probably the trickiest part of the whole wing build, and maybe even the trickiest part of the whole airplane build. Maybe it won't be for you, but I've seen this step really cause some problems with wings. Now, remember, this rectangular part of the wing on this side is going to be the bottom of the wing. It's going to be a flat bottom wing. This part of the wing is going to be the curved or top part of the wing. Okay, so everything is going to be referenced to the flat side because we want the wing to be flat and untwisted. So what we need to do is to be able to fold this wing over, the curved part, fold it over. However, the big warning here, what I've noticed sometimes people do is they'll kind of grab onto the foam here, they'll sort of grab onto the trailing edge and try to bend it over. If you do that, you're gonna get a wing that's not quite as smooth and curved as it could be, and it even could cause some problems where you'll have to redo it. You see there are these score marks in the wing on both sides. And that helps the wing conform to the shape that you're trying to make. If you grab it here though and push, it's gonna cause the wing to kink in these places. What we want to do is try to get this wing to curve and bend about the leading edge that we've just beveled. You see this nice V bevel here. So my strongest recommendation here is bend this up, put your hand down all the way down to the table, okay? And we're gonna just gently and slowly kind of cold work this foam. You see how I'm not pushing on the top? I'm pushing down here, and I'm slowly working that leading edge, causing the foam to distort and bend. And if you've got that V bevel in there that we made with our tool, it's gonna bend for you. Maybe it's gonna make some scary noises, but just keep working it like this, and you see it'll start to give. And you see how I'm not getting any kinks in this wing. You're gonna see some lines, and those are okay. But if you see it kink over, and the wing start to form sort of like a severe geometric shape, you're doing something wrong. So I'm trying to bend this down, just slowly working it. Okay, and you see I'm able to actually fold it all the way over now. So this wing is ready to go. We're ready to actually start gluing it now. Now we finally get to glue something. Go ahead and fold your wing back open. You see your V bevel is still here. And grab your shear web, it's called. Just a rectangular strip of foam. And we always dry fit everything. So this piece here is going to be glued down on the flat side, or you could say the rectangular side of this wing. Right in between these two grooves, you see these lines that are cut. They're scored in the foam. And it's going to be glued down right here. Okay? So it looks like that fits properly. And so we're going to go ahead and put the glue bead down. Remember what I said about trying to work quickly. I'm having some trouble with the trigger on my glue gun here, so I'm having to push the glue, but it's gone through. So I lay that shear web down and then gently hold it in place. Make sure it stays aligned. And we're going to wait about 30 seconds before we do the next step. We're ready to add what is the most important structural part of your wing. It enables it to handle as much load as these wings can in the high G turns that they do when they're racing. You see, this is a carbon fiber tube, and basically what it is, it's a tube made out of carbon fiber where all the fibers are running longitudinally, and it makes it quite stiff. And so this gets integrated into the wing. It's actually going to be glued in right here on the, you might call this the inside of the shear web. In other words, the side of your wing towards the bevel. Okay? So what I'm going to do is just set that aside for a minute, and then I'm going to run a bead of glue all the way along the inside edge of the shear web, and then I'm gonna put that spar tube right on top of it. Okay, so I need to start about here. Okay, now I can just roll that tube right into position. Okay, let's let that glue harden, and then we'll be ready to do the next step. The next step here may be the most time critical, because remember I said that hot glue only has a certain working time, you know, maybe 30 seconds at most, and we've got to do the most gluing right now. What we're going to do is place a bead of glue along the bevel that we made. That's going to be the inside of the leading edge of the wing. We're going to put another bead of glue on top of the shear web, and then finally another bead of glue right along the carbon fiber spar. And then we're going to fold everything over, and then we're going to have to hold it down. And we want to hold this down for about a minute at least, because with the quantity of glue that we're going to use, it usually has a little bit more working time, but you want to make sure that it's absolutely hardened before we go ahead and release the pressure on the wing. Okay, so check that your glue gun is working. Put a test bead out here on my piece of paper. I was having trouble with it earlier because where my two glue sticks fused, there was like a little lip that popped up and it was getting jammed, but it's okay now. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a bead in this leading edge. Now another bead, I'll kind of put a zigzag in it because the shear web's a little bit wide. A little excess there. And then go ahead and put a bead right on top of my spar. Okay, now the important part is to do what we did before. Grab this wing, push from the bottom, like I showed you before, and work it down. And basically hold this whole thing down. I like to do it this way, basically use my whole arm all the way across the wing. We're trying to make sure that the wing stays flat along the table. Probably one of the most critical parts of the whole design. And I'm just gonna sit here now like this for at least a minute. And then we'll come back and I'll show you how it all worked out. Okay, it's been a couple of minutes and we have one more bead of glue. Notice here, the bottom side of the wing, that on the bottom side of the wing, the trailing edge is inset from the top side of the wing. And if you look here, the trailing edge of the bottom side of the wing is not bonded down yet. You see how there's a gap. We didn't glue that down before because there's just not enough time to get all those glue beads down and fold everything over and hold it in place before things start hardening. So we're gonna do this one now. And so best thing to do is to just kind of hold it back a little bit, hold a little gap in the bottom of this wing, and go ahead and take your glue gun and put a bead of glue just inside that gap, all the way across. Watch out for my thumb. And now do just like we did before. Actually, what I can do is take one of those scrap pieces. I have a little bit of excess. Scrape the excess off and then get it down flat on the table as soon as you can. And then hold it again just like we did before, all the way across. Hold it for another couple of minutes. Okay, what you've just completed is arguably the most critical and the most difficult part of the build, is to try to get the wing done and make sure that the wing is flat. And what I mean by flat is that it lays, you notice it's flat on the table. You see one side doesn't kick up, on the other I can push down on the wing pretty much anywhere and it stays in place. So there's no twist to the wing. If you have any twist in your wing, if like one side is kicked up over here, what'll end up happening is your airplane will always be wanting to turn. It'll be out of trim. It'll be difficult to fly. So you notice we've got the wing, the bottom of it, the bottom is nice and flat. The top has got a nice curve to it. Now it's not a perfect curve, but that's the way these foam planes typically are. I'll see if I can show it to you the best of my ability. You see it's pretty thin wing. Not enough room for me to put the whole wing perpendicular up to show you this, but you see how thin it is. That'll keep our drag low for a pylon racing kind of airplane. The bottom side is very flat. The top side is curved. There's a little bit of a bevel in it. It's not an absolute perfect curve, but that's okay. This is where we see most of the teams that have problems with the wing. They get a twist in the wing, or they end up folding them over and they get like really kind of sharp sort of mounds in the wing. They end up too thick, or they end up, sometimes we'll see mistakenly, teams will put the top side of the wing, that's the part that they'll lay flat against the table, and they'll try to fold that way. Well, what it'll end up doing is make the top part of your wing mostly flat, which is really bad for aerodynamics. So, but if you follow the directions in this video, I think you'll be able to generate a racing wing just like this without too much difficulty. Just practice what you can, especially the beveling and working with some foam, with some practice foam before you make the wing, so that you have some confidence. So now we can start setting up the controls. The next step here is to cut out the ailerons. Notice we didn't do that before because we wanted the ailerons, they're still tabbed in place, and they were useful to us that way before to help us hold the wing down. But now we need to start cutting them out. So just like we did with other parts where we have to cut the tabs away, you see this aileron has a tab here, and here, and here. Okay, let's flip it over. And all those tabs are gone. And so what we can do, just very gently, there might have been a little bit of a tab there, very gently kind of crack those ailerons over like this. And then what I'm doing, you'll notice, is I'm bending them all the way over to the top side like this. Okay? And what I'm going to do with these ailerons now is I'm going to bevel this inside edge. All right, beveling that inside edge is going to allow the aileron to travel more. You see what end up happening if we don't bevel that aileron on the inside? You notice it can't go any further than this. So ailerons need to go, one goes up, one needs to go down, and that helps your airplane roll. So these ailerons can't go down. So we need to add a bevel. So just like we did before with the bevel tool. See, another reason we waited to do the ailerons, it makes it nice and easy here. They're kind of sticking up proud of the wing. Let's just come, since there's a little bit of extra paper here, I'm going to come a little bit off the edge. Cut that bevel. Okay, there's the port side. By the way, in aviation, we use port and starboard to refer to left and right. It comes from the nautical or ship days. And the way to remember is port side is the left side. Port and left both have 4 letters. That's the way I remember it. So this is the port side, this is the starboard side. So let's go ahead and bevel the starboard side aileron. Oops, I came off my guide a little bit there, so I need to touch that up. There we go. You see how it didn't cut all the way through the paper? But now look at these ailerons. You see how far down they can deflect? That's why we bevel the bottom. Okay, we're gonna do one more thing to reinforce these ailerons because they get used a lot, and the only thing that's holding that aileron together is that little sheet of paper. We'd like to reinforce that a little bit. So there's a trick you can do, but what you gotta, to make the trick work, you gotta be ready with a scrap piece of cardboard or foam. And what we're gonna do is lay just a tiny little bead of glue down right along that hinge, and then we're gonna scrape all that glue off. Well, the residue of glue it leaves on that hinge line will reinforce the hinge and make it stronger for us. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna do one side at a time. I'm gonna put just the tiniest little bead of glue right along that paper hinge line. Really thin line of glue. And now what I'm gonna do is try to scrape it all off. And just keep scraping it a couple of times. And you see it'll kind of wipe that glue into the foam. Make sure you don't leave any in the corners. Okay? And I'm gonna leave that glue to dry. Don't want to fold this on itself. You don't want to glue the aileron shut. Leave it open like this. And then let that glue fully dry. And I'm gonna do off camera, I'm gonna go ahead and do the exact same thing to the starboard side aileron. I'll let this glue fully dry and then come back and show you. Okay, those hinge reinforcements are dry now. And you see, don't worry, they'll tend to want to stick up like this, but that's okay. But you'll see that they're much more reinforced now. They're a little bit stiffer, but that's okay. We've got plenty of travel down and a nice reinforced hinge line, so those ailerons will end up lasting longer for us before they start tearing off. If one ever did tear off, or if you ever had a problem with it, you can go ahead and take a piece of packing tape and lay the packing tape along your aileron and use packing tape as your hinge. Okay, the next step now is we're gonna mount the control rods. You'll notice a laser cut piece. It's a plywood piece in your kit. And these are different control horns, they're called. You'll notice that there are some control horns, there are 3 of them with large holes and 3 of them with small holes. What you're gonna do now is cut out the ones, because the laser doesn't go all the way through. So you might need to, on the back side, help score it a little bit and help cut out the horns that actually have the big holes in them. Okay? And just kind of carefully break those out. You see that one's not quite ready to come out yet. Just be patient with it, because you don't want to break it. You know, it'll feel like they have tabs in them like the foam do, but obviously plywood doesn't cut as easy as the foam. So you just need to be patient. And getting close. This one's not quite all the way through yet. And there it comes. Okay, and there's one of the horns. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Really, we only need one more at this point, but you might as well do it 2 more times and have all 3 horns cut out, because you need 2 for the ailerons and 1 for the elevator. I'll go ahead and do that, get them prepped, and then we'll come back and glue them in. You can see I've cut out the 3 horns. I only need 2 of them right now, but once again, they're the horns that actually have the larger holes. I popped out the holes, and so the edges look good. And so what we're going to do is dry fit them in place. Remember, we always want to dry fit everything, test everything before we glue it down. So these horns, see if I can get it in a position you can see it easier. These horns, the 3 holes, you want them to be above the hinge line. Okay, this is the, get you oriented again, this is the trailing edge of the wing, leading edge of the wing. You see the little slot right here where this horn goes. I can push it in place, okay? But the important thing is when the aileron is closed, you want those 3 holes to be right above the hinge, just like that. Okay, and we're gonna do that. We'll do that to both sides. And we'll just make sure it operates. This one needs to go back a little bit. Make sure we have clearance. And it can deflect. Okay. And then the other thing we're going to glue in at this point too is there's this little rectangular piece that's in your kit. And this glues on right there. All that does is, you notice there's this step down between the bottom side of the wing and the top side of the wing. And when you lay this on the fuselage, you'd like this whole part of the wing to lay flat against the fuselage. So all this part does is it levels it out. Okay, so I'm gonna glue all 3 of these parts in position. I'll just put a little bead of glue right in that slot. And as always, I can scrape off the excess. I'll go ahead and do the other side. Scrape off the excess there. Make sure they're standing up straight. And then finally, I'll go ahead on the bottom side of this piece and just put some glue down and try to get that as centered as you can. Make sure there's no glue oozing out. No. Okay, we'll just let that cure for a minute or 2, and then we'll come back and install servos. We're ready to install the servos and the control rods. There's your two control rods with what are called Z-bends on the end of them. Your 2 servos for the ailerons. The thing we need to install on these servo horns, on the aileron servos, are these so-called Easy Link connectors. And I'm going to try to get it up close here so you can see. They consist of a metal, I believe it's a brass piece, a rubber piece on the bottom that holds it in place but still allows it to spin, and then a screw on the top that holds the linkage in place. Okay, I already did this one so you could see it installed. I'm going to show you how to do it on this one. okay? Problem is it's going to be difficult for you to see with my meaty claws here, but I'm going to do my best to show you. What you'll notice is that the metal piece won't fit. We want to go through we're going to use the middle servo hole. Okay, there's 3 holes here. We're going to use the one in the middle. Problem is, it won't go through. Okay, the shaft is too big to fit through there. So, well, we didn't provide you with any tiny little drill bits, but you won't need that. What you can use is your sharp X-Acto blade. And what you do is you just stick it into that center hole there and then just gently twist, and you'll see it'll scrape some of the plastic out. Then you flip it around, do it to the other side, and then test and see, okay, is it big enough yet? And so we'll try to fit that through there. Okay, it went through, great. Now the hardest part for me is to get this little conical plastic piece on. I'll do my best for you to be able to see me do that, but I just push it on in place and then just make sure it goes all the way on. Okay, so you see this piece up here. You see the metal piece. It can spin, but it won't come out. And there's a piece of the metal coming out the bottom of that plastic. And then the last thing we need to do is use your 0 Phillips screwdriver and put that into the top of the easy connector. I'll do this off camera and we'll be back. Okay, I got them both installed here. Both servos with easy connectors installed. And so now we're going to put them into the wings. Okay, remember when we first set up our servos, I said they needed to go opposite directions, and now you'll see why. Okay, this servo horn needs to align with the aileron horn. Okay, so this one, you see cord going forward. This one's going to go in there like that. This one's going to go in here like this. Okay, oops, a little bit further. So the horns line up with the aileron control horns. Okay, so what we need to do first is fish the cables through. So fish your cable through here. You can use you can use your Z-bend connector here if you don't have any kind of tools that'll allow you to pop that out. You could use a needle nose or anything like that, but there's enough space in here that you can actually get them out, fishing them out with your Z-bend connector. Okay, so I've got the servo wires out. So now we can push the wires down and try to get this servo aligned. And you see, the problem is that the servo horn, or I should say the servo mounting tabs are too wide, okay? And I can't push this servo down. But that's okay. That's actually going to be an opportunity for us. I'll show you in a minute. We'll get everything lined up. Okay. And so I'll do it on this one first. Once you get the horns aligned, just kind of gently press down. It'll make an indentation where you need to score the foam, and just score the foam where those servo mounting flanges are, and now it'll just press into place. Okay, I'll do the same on this side. Get them aligned. Just need to get that out of the way. Press that in place. Just gently make a slot through the foam where those mounting plates were. Push the servo in, okay? Now these servos are not ready to go. They are what we call dry fit, right? So the next step is going to be to get the control linkages lined up and set up. We're going to pull the servos back out again and then glue them in place. Okay, so now we've got them dry fit. We can pull them back out. Okay, we can pull them out like that. And now we can go ahead and you see you've got these control linkages that have a Z-bend side and a straight side. Okay, it's easier to go ahead and mount the Z-bend first. So go ahead and we're going to go to the center hole again, stick the Z-bend in through the hole, and then rotate it around. And you see that kind of locks it in place. All right, I'll do it to that side. And I'll do it to this side. All right, now I need to get these rods on the servos. I've got a tangled mess here. Okay, so those Z-bends are connected to at the aileron end, and then you see, remember we have these easy connectors, they have holes in the side of them. So we're going to go ahead and fish that rod right through the hole. Oh, well, that screw is in the way. So that's when we back it out a little bit. There we go. It slides right on. We don't need to tighten them down yet, because we're going to get everything dry fit again, just to kind of rough fit it in place. Okay, we'll do the same thing to this side. Put that control rod through the easy connector. Undo the screw if it's a little too tight. Slide that on. Dry fit that in place again. Okay, and there we go. All right, now, as long as these servo horns, you see the servo horns are straight up. Remember, they were set to about 90 degrees before they were zeroed. We want to cut off this excess rod. This is why we gave you this heavy duty cable cutting tool, because you can do it with a pair of pliers or needle nose or something like that with a wire cutter in it. But usually you got to bear down really hard on it. And these tools are cheap enough that we figured we'd throw them into the kit, because, you know, it's like my mom always said, a carpenter's only as sharp as his tools. And so these will cut them nice and clean and easy. And so all you're going to do, make sure your ailerons are flat, push the trailing edge against the table. Okay? And then just to allow yourself some room to adjust, you can always nibble this down later if you don't want the excess. Give yourself about a 1/4 inch to maybe a 1/2 inch of excess. Hold on to the free end so it doesn't shoot across the room. And then it's easy as that. And we'll cut off the other side. Okay. We could, if we wanted to now, temporarily tighten down these screws. It'll just make it easier so it doesn't come out on us. Okay, we'll tighten those down again in a minute. All right, last step is we've got to glue these servos into place. So one more time, pull them out gently like this, and then as a little trick to help you help them stay in place a little bit better, you can do this with your X-Acto blade, or you can do it with a piece of sandpaper, but just kind of rough up the back of the servo. I like to put just kind of a crosshatch pattern in it. It'll just give the glue something to grab on a little bit better. Okay, and then we can go ahead and like to put a big dollop of glue on the bottom, and then I also put one in these slots. And now pull on the cable and push that servo down. And if you want, if you have a little bit of excess, you can wipe it off if you like. Having a little bit extra there as a little bead is not going to hurt you drag-wise, and it might help it hold in better. But go ahead and hold that servo down for a little bit. And then go ahead and repeat for this side. And just gently pull the servo out, score it, glue it, put it back in. Okay, that glue is hardened. I'm going to come back in here and tighten up that linkage. Always want to make sure these are tight, because you can lose an airplane if these slip. I usually, as a matter of principle, don't like these kind of connectors from the standpoint of, you know, sort of the structural reliability, but they're really nice for an airplane like this because they allow variability, and it's good for beginners. You don't have to learn to Z-bend two sides and get everything lined up. But there we go, we have completed your wing. See, we've got a nice flat bottom wing. We've got 2 ailerons installed. You see, they are well secured in there. The tabs are glued in. They're also glued on the bottom. Remember, I'm not going to show you operating them. I'm not going to show them operating right now, because remember what I told you before, never force a servo to move when it's off, because you can strip the gears. But when we turn the whole airplane on together, when we get everything set up and the radio gear installed, we'll go ahead and test the controls, and we can always come back and tweak them later. But this is what your wing should look like. Nice, thin, strong racing wing. This section will be about making the fuselage and also putting on the horizontal stabilizer. These are the parts that we're going to be using in this section. This is the majority of the fuselage right here. It's actually the top of the fuselage and the two sides. This is the bottom of the fuselage here, this part, horizontal stab, and then servo, control rod, horn, easy connector, and so forth. So let's begin. First step, as usual, is to pluck the foam. You notice this is a servo mounting location. This is an exhaust port. This is actually how you get into the part of the fuselage. This scoop right here, we're going to leave this alone. But you can remove these parts and then go ahead and pluck all the foam that is on the edges of the fuselage. So I'll show you how to do that. First step, turn this over. This is actually the outside of the fuselage now. And as we've done before, go ahead and cut off the little tabs. Take those parts out. And now gently break over the sides of the fuselage. And we're going to start plucking the foam. You see the foam along these edges all the way around. Just kind of gently peel it away. Sometimes what you'll have to do, if the laser cutter didn't quite go deep enough, you may find that you need to gently score the foam, but make sure if you do that, if you can't pluck the foam away, make sure if you need to score it like this, that you don't actually put the blade all the way through the paper on the outside, because you'll end up cutting that part off. I find for the most part, the kit is pretty good in this regard, and I don't need to do a lot of scoring. But you never know, you may have to do that. So you see, I'm just slowly working my way around, plucking this foam off. I've plucked the foam out, but what you're going to notice is there's a couple of spots that I'm going to need to scrape some additional foam out, like we talked about in the working with foam tutorial. If you look in just a couple of places, you see there's some leftover foam here, just a little bit there. You see at the very end here, there's some foam there. Also, I haven't cut out this servo mount location. I need to do that. Now that is actually a part that doesn't go all the way through. So you're just gonna pluck that foam, just like you plucked some of the sides of the foam on the fuselage. You need to pluck this away, and you're gonna leave the paper there. Okay, and you see once again there's a little bit of foam here. So just like I showed you before, you can use the back of the knife or the side of the knife. Scrape that foam away. And then go ahead and work your way all the way around the edge of the fuselage. And anywhere you see a little bit of excess foam, just go ahead and scrape that off. You might be able to get it off with your fingers, but you may need to scrape it with your knife. You may find it easier to lay it. I'm trying to hold it up so you can see a little bit better. You may find it easier to do that scraping against the table. And you see I'm using the back side of the knife. And I'm just scraping that little bit of excess foam away. So all that remains all the way around is that paper. And that'll give us nice crisp edges when we fold up the sides. So I'll go ahead and work on that off camera, and then I'll be right back. I've scraped away all the excess foam in all of these locations where we're going to fold the fuselage. And so now what I can do is test fit everything. Now, remember, this is going to be actually the top of the fuselage, so it's kind of upside down right now. And we're going to fold the sides up when we glue everything together. Now this assembly is what is oftentimes called a B-fold. What a B-fold means is that when the side folds up, it folds up against the bottom. Okay, so I'll try to show you that in a couple of different ways. You might be able to see it better from, if I fold these back, you can see this in this orientation. You notice if I fold the sides up, you see the sides are up against the bottom foam. The sides are not resting on top of the bottom foam. They're on the side. Okay? Let me show that again. You just rotate the side up like this and up like this. So these two edges will be down against the table. Okay, so we've test fit. Everything looks good. Make sure you're ready with your square. And let's go ahead and glue just this section in here. We're just gonna work in this center section, and we'll go in the front section and then the back section. And remember, I taught you earlier, start and stop about a 1/2 inch from the ends. So the end is going to be where these score marks are. Okay, I don't want glue oozing out in either one of those directions, because it'll make it difficult for everything to close. Okay, so run a little bit of beaded glue here, starting about a 1/2 inch in. Once again, it doesn't take a lot of glue, and stop about a 1/2 inch short. Start about a 1/2 inch short. Stop about a 1/2 inch short. I'll hold those sides up, and I can check square on that side, check square on this side. And I'll just hold this until the glue hardens. Just keep checking square. Okay, the center section glue is hardened. You notice I like to use the table as a reference with it whenever I can. The reason I didn't do the front or back sections is because the fuselage is designed to not be completely flat on the top. This is actually right side up for the airplane. This is how the fuselage sits. And this surface is not intended to be completely flat. Okay, so I'm doing each individual section. I do the center section first, and then I can gently bend back these side pieces, and this piece here, when I glue together the forward part of the fuselage, you won't be able to see this, but you have to just trust me here. So if I hold the forward part of the fuselage flat, the center section has raised up, okay? And so when I put the glue in, I'll hold it like this, and then I'll do the same thing to the back. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna run a bead of glue in here, 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 and on both of these sides. Once again, we start and stop before the edges. Okay. Now I'll run the glue along the bottom side here. And this other side. Okay. Hold everything together. I can check that I'm holding it square. Might help to hold it with one hand like this. And so now I just hold the part like this. If you see some parts that actually there's some excess glue, you know, you can feel free to wipe that off. It's already hardening. We're going to do the same thing to the back end of the fuselage now. Glue here, here, and here, and then along these two edges. I didn't put a lot where that servo cutout is because we'll be putting more glue in there later. Okay, lay that bottom part on the table. Bring all the sides together. And hold it in place. Checking square. And just let that harden. We're going to add a little strength to the corners because once we close this up, we won't be able to access it anymore. We're going to run a bead of glue in the corners, starting from behind this little inlet here. Don't go all the way up to the front. And the reason for that is because we need to fit something in there later called the power pod. Okay, so you can start your glue back approximately here. We'll run it all the way down the edge. We'll skip where the servo mount is and then go all the way to the outside here. Okay, so I'm going to run this glue bead here. I'm going to jump over that servo mount location. Okay, if you like to make it a little bit neater, you could scrape it, scrape the excess in the corners here. And then we'll just go ahead and just choose one reference, square it up and hold it in place until that glue dries. And then we'll go ahead and do the other side as well. Now we've got the three sides of the fuselage all bonded together. Let's work on the horizontal stabilizer, or the horizontal stab, sometimes called. And we've got to mount this to this. First step, as usual, is to pluck the foam. You see that there's going to be some tabs, just like you noticed on the aileron. So you'll want to cut those tabs out, the elevator. You also have these mounting locations you want to cut out as well. Okay, so we need to cut these little pieces of foam out. It's usually easier to see it from this other side. And pluck these foam out. And we'll go ahead and do that for the rest of these, and then we'll get ready to bevel. Okay, I plucked out these three different foam pieces. These are to mount to the fuselage. This is where the vertical stab is going to mount. And I've also cut the tabs out. On mine, I actually needed to go all the way through on the ends here. There was a little bit of foam that didn't seem to be cut. And then also on mine, the stab, it's just a little bit too stiff for me to pull it back and break that open. So I think that's an indication to me that I need to score this foam a little bit. If you can't easily break that foam, then it's probably an indication of it needs to be scored a little bit. But remember, when you score, you're not going all the way through. You're just cutting down into that foam a little bit. But now it should be a lot easier to break away. And you see it is. Okay? So there's my elevator. And I'm gonna do what I did with the ailerons. This elevator needs to be able to move both directions. It can only move this way now. So I need to put a bevel on the elevator side. So lay the stab flat on the table. Take your bevel tool. Align that edge just like we went over in the tutorial. And you see now with that bevel, the elevator can move both directions. It can move down and it can move up. Elevator don't need to move a whole lot, but they do need to be able to move both directions. If you remember how we installed the elevator, or I'm sorry, the aileron horns, we're going to do the same for the elevator now. You remember we had one remaining control horn, and that's going to be for the elevator. It's important to know that you need to put it on the correct side. You see I've got the top surface here against the table, so this is the side with the bevel. That's where the horn's going to go. And just like told you before, that horn, I'm dry fitting it right now, that horn needs to be able to be mounted so that these holes are above the hinge line, okay? So this one needs to go forward just a little bit. there we go. The holes are above the hinge line, and you see it can operate nicely. So now that it's been dry fit, I can glue that horn into place. Make sure it's square, and we'll let that harden. Now we need to install the easy connector on the horn side this time. And the reason that we did it differently on the ailerons is because the ailerons we can have access to whenever we want, so we can make some adjustments when needed. But if we try to put the easy connector on the servo horn, the servo actually goes inside the fuselage, which is then sealed up. So we'll never be able to access that again unless we cut out the side of the fuselage. So we go ahead and put the easy connector on the control surface horn this time. And we're gonna put it in on this side. So turns out it's the port side of the airplane, but it's my right. So if you're looking at it and you have the horizontal stab laying down on the table and the horn up, use your right hand and put that connector through the control horn, and then go ahead and put on this small little plastic piece. Make sure it's pushed all the way on. This next step can be a little bit tricky. We turn our fuselage over so it's right side up. And these two tabs you see here, these are what the horizontal stab are going to mount to, these two outer holes. Once again, just like always, we want to try to dry fit things. Now sometimes, because you see there are all these little tabs of paper, and sometimes those tabs of paper can get in the way, okay? If maybe when you cut out these holes, there's some excess paper there, make sure you've cleared that out. Double check that maybe some of this paper isn't peeling off like it is here. We can fix that later with a little bit of glue, that's not a problem. But it's an issue when you're trying to fit things together. Sometimes it's helpful actually to just go ahead and just gently pinch in these edges so they're not splaying out. Okay, and now this is important because it'd be easy to make a mistake. You see the fuselage is right side up now. Okay, this is the top of the airplane. This is the top of the horizontal stab. Remember, this is the bottom. The bottom side is the side with the bevel and the side with the horn. So turn it over like this, and then go ahead and dry fit that stab onto those tabs and make sure that that fits nicely. Okay, then what we can do is take this stab off, and we can apply the glue. You don't need to apply glue on top of these because they just push right through, right? So we need to apply glue all along these edges here and up the sides. And one thing I've noticed on some of these kits, I don't know if you can see it when you're get a little closer, but you see the foam is actually recessed a little bit behind the paper. And so if we use just a tiny amount of glue there, it actually may not it may not actually touch the horizontal stab. So if you have a situation like this where that foam is sort of cupped there, you may need to use a little bit more glue. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do that now. Put some foam in there and up the side. Same thing on this side. Using a little bit more than I normally do just because of this issue I was telling you about. Okay, and now I quickly put this stab on, turn the whole thing upside down, and now use the table as a guide. And I can check square, and I can also scrape off any excess that might be in these corners. And I'll just hold this in place, keep checking square, let that glue harden. I'm going to do a little touch up now because there's some gaps and there's some fraying paper, and it's really easy to work with foam. It's really forgiving. And so what I can do is I'm just in these little gaps where the tabs went in, I can add a little bit of glue and then just scrape off the excess. And then you see where the paper's fraying a little bit in these corners. I can do the same kind of thing. I can inject a little bit of glue there and then just fold that paper up and wipe off the excess. So I'll go ahead first and put some glue in this gap, and then this gap, and I can go ahead and scrape off that excess. Same kind of thing, inject a little bit into that corner. That's why it's nice to have these scrap pieces of foam laying around. I can just wipe the excess there. Here's another example of an area that I can touch up. You see here, this is a section where the paper didn't quite stay down in this corner. And we use the same procedure that I've shown you a couple of times now. Just go ahead and put a little bit of glue in there. And then just go ahead and wipe it into that corner. Scrape off the excess, and it's filled now. So it's pretty forgiving working with the hot glue, as long as you're quick. Time to mount the elevator servo. So here's that elevator servo. We need to connect the Z-bend to this servo horn, and we want it to go into the middle horn location. Problem is, just like we saw before with the ailerons, the rod is too large to fit into that hole. So just like we did before, we're going to use our X-Acto knife as sort of a drill. And we're going to go ahead and just carefully drill that open. Do it a little bit at a time to make sure you don't want slop in your control surfaces. So, okay, I have some experience at doing this, so got lucky there, and that worked the first time, and it's in there tight, you know, so it can still move, but there's no slop. Okay, where that servo is going to go is down into this servo slot. okay? And it will pretty much sit down right in there, okay? Get a little bit of closer view there. Now, it's important that that servo doesn't move, because once again, if anything happens to that servo, we can't access it. I mean, if it pops up because it's not glued in well enough, the only way we can service this is to cut a hole in the side of the fuselage and service it and then patch somehow. Make sure you have the orientation right, the way that I have it here. So you notice my cable is facing towards the front of the airplane. And remember what we did before to make sure that the servo glued into place nicely is we wanted to rough up the surface that was going to be glued. Okay, now you can once again do this with some rough grit sandpaper, or you can score it with your X-Acto blade. We're going to glue it on the bottom and we're going to glue it on the side. So go ahead and scuff up the side. I kind of like to make a crosshatch pattern. And I'll do the same thing on the bottom. Okay, that's ready to be glued in place. But before you do that, you need to make sure that you put this rod through your easy connector. Okay, so come down here. That screw is in a little bit too far. Okay, and test fit everything once again. Get this servo in here. There you go. You see how everything fits in there nicely. We'll cut the excess later. But now we're ready to glue this. So go ahead and put a big dollop of glue on the bottom and on the side. This is one case where we're not really concerned about having too much glue. Put the servo in place and hold on to it. Just make sure you don't put so much glue on the side that it actually gets inside the spline, a servo horn or anything like that. Okay, that glue has hardened, and so we can go ahead and tighten down the servo. Actually, the servo control linkage. Making sure that this is tight is very important for safety of the airplane, because if this slips, the pilot has no pitch authority on the airplane. Okay, and like we did before, we'll go ahead and use the cable cutter to cut the excess off, leave about a 1/4 inch extending beyond the easy connector. Put your finger onto the end of this just so it doesn't shoot across the room or shoot up and hit somebody or get in your eye or something like that. All right, so the elevator servo is completely installed. Next step is to pluck the foam off the bottom part of the fuselage. This part, after the foam is plucked, is going to install just like this. I've plucked the foam and proceeded as before. On my kit, I actually did need to do some scoring to get that foam out. But I scraped off any excess foam on these edges. And so we're gonna test fit again like we always do. Once again, this airplane's sitting upside down right now. And so I need to test fit this. You see, it goes just like this. It actually fits pretty nicely on mine. And I think one of the reasons is because I was careful when I glued everything together to try to keep the edges square using my square. So you see all these edges are square. I need to apply glue to the edges here. And you notice, once again, you might be able to see this. This foam is cupped, so the paper rises a little bit higher than the foam. So if I just use a small amount of glue in there, once again, it may not touch the paper. So I think what I'm going to do in this case is put a pretty good bead of glue on both sides here. And then I'm going to flip it over. And then that way I'll just use gravity so that that glue will drop down onto the paper here. Now I'm going to try to work quickly because I need to put that glue in. I will, when I press everything down, some of it may ooze out the side, so I'll want to have my scrap pieces of foam ready so I can scrape those off quickly. I'm going to flip it over, and then I'm going to hold it. I'm going to hold everything down, front and back. And the reason I'm going to do this is because sometimes what you'll find in these, in the fuselage, they'll twist a little bit, they'll warp. And so if I hold it down against the reference, I can make sure that little bit of twist is not in there. So let's go ahead and try to glue this together. You're going to be using a pretty good amount of glue, so make sure you've got plenty. You're not towards the end, because that's always a disaster, is if you've got just a little bit of glue left and you start a job, you have to go find a glue stick. It may harden by the time that you get back. So we'll go ahead and you probably can't see the glue in the video from there, but I'm definitely using a larger bead than I normally do for the reasons I stated. Now this glue, obviously it's very hot, and when you have this much excess, you got to make sure you don't burn yourself. So I'll slide that top piece in, hold it down, and I'll go ahead and scrape both sides. See, just as I thought, there is some excess on both sides. Now I'm going to flip it over and hold it in place. And because of how much glue there was, I'm going to sit here like this for a couple of minutes. Okay, I've waited a couple of minutes for this glue to dry, or to harden. And one thing that you'll sometimes find when you're using hot glue and you're gluing something on the bottom and you're using this Fiskars surface as a reference, is sometimes it'll stick to the table. A little bit of glue will ooze out and it'll stick to the table. So it's fortunate in this case that this happened, and I can show you what to do. because it's common. And these surfaces are really nice. The glue comes off them very easily. You can just rub it off or scrape it off. But to get your part off the table, don't pull up, okay? Because you can damage it. Hold it down and just gently rotate it. And you hear it just kind of cracked free. And there you go. That part is done. If you get a little bit of glue on your Fiskars mat, like I've put here on purpose, just to show you that it's easy. If it's a larger bead of glue, it'll just peel up. Sometimes, like when you actually have, like I gave you the example where this stuck down just a little bit, it's just a little bit of surface glue just touching the mat. And you can wipe it off with your fingers, rub it off. You usually won't have to use any kind of scraping tool, but you could if you have a problem with it. Our fuselage is all done now. You can see it sits square on the table. It doesn't rotate. In other words, the nose is not rotated relative to the tail, and the tail is horizontal. You know, we checked that all along when we were doing our square. And off camera, I went around and did what I did back here to the horizontal stab. If there's little bits of paper that are peeling up, I'll touch it up. I might, if glue gets on the side, you can usually rub it off with your finger, but just kind of touch things up and make it as nice as you can. It's not going to be perfect because hot glue is not the kind of glue that you can sand on and really get crisp edges, but you can get pretty close with it. And so now that the fuselage is done, we can move on to the power pod. There are really only a few parts left to finish your airplane. In terms of the structure anyway. We've got the vertical stab, which we like to put on last. And I like to do that last because it allows us to work on this fuselage and hold it flat against the tail, hold the tail flat against the table, whether it's upside down or right side up. So that's why we didn't put that vertical stab on yet. But these remaining pieces, this piece here with the foam that needs to be plucked, this plywood firewall, and a couple of these firewall, they're sort of triangle pieces or trapezoids. They're reinforcement pieces that'll make the firewall stronger because that's what the motor's going to attach to. But that's it. So we're going to go ahead and pluck that foam and start to make the power pod. So I've plucked the foam on the foam part of this power pod. And the thing to remember about this part of the pod is that this is what's called an A fold. The B fold is when the sides fold up against the bottom, okay? Against the side of the bottom. This is an A fold. So if you can see, the sides are going to fold up on top of the bottom piece, like this. This is what's called an A fold. Okay? And before we glue anything, let's just make sure that it's going to fit. This piece is going to serve as a doubler or reinforcement to the front of the fuselage. And so it has to fit in like this. Okay? So it's good, it fits, and we can go ahead and glue it. And I'm just going to do one side at a time, since this side goes up on top of the bottom piece, I'm gonna glue the bottom of the side. Once again, I kind of start and end before the end of the foam. Then I'll rotate it up on top. Scrape off the excess. And then go ahead and hold my square against it while that cures. And then I'll go ahead and do the same to the other side. Okay, I'm done with the foam part of the power pod. And I can test fit once again, make sure it fits inside the fuselage. That works nicely. So before we finish this, we need to talk about how the motor is going to mount to the firewall. Now, this may be different on the kit that you get, but what I'm going to do is go over the worst case scenario. Your kit may actually be modified so that the laser cut pattern has been modified to accommodate the new motors, but this one has not. But we can still make this work. So let's take a look at what motor we're using. This year we're using really high quality motors. It's a BA 2305 2500 kV if you want to know the specific numbers. We also have the information on the website. It's a brushless motor. And the thing to notice on this motor is it's kind of surprising. This is the front, because you see the 3 holes here. There's actually a mount that screws into this, and that accommodates the prop. This part actually it really is not used for anything in our application. So it's kind of a nuisance, but we have to deal with it. It's going to go through the firewall, but the firewall, the hole that's already drilled into it or laser cut into it, is not big enough to accommodate it. Okay, so that's something that's a modification we're going to have to make. This circle right here, this you can cut out. Actually I can just peel it out right now. This is actually a chase for your wires. The motor wires are actually going to go through that hole. And how the motor is going to mount to this firewall is with this motor mount, okay? And so what we need to do is drill out the center part of this firewall so it's large enough so that shaft can go through with it and it doesn't rub. You don't want your motor shaft rubbing on the firewall. Okay? And now the hole patterns are okay. You can see there are these tiny little holes here that have been laser cut out. You should be able to pop those out with an X-Acto blade, and we're going to use a type of wood screw to screw this mount down to the firewall. But you ought to be able to at least use those holes, these tiny ones, out here at the edge. You'll see when I put it all together. But what I need to do now is make this center hole large enough so that shaft doesn't rub. Now, if you happen to have a drill press or something like that, and you can drill that out, great. It'll have to be a relatively large drill. But the other thing you can do, if you don't even have that, is you can just use a knife and you can just cut out these pieces. If you don't have a drill, I'm just gonna assume that you don't have any tools other than what we gave you. And so I'm gonna assume worst case scenario that you just have to do it with a knife. Well, the way that I did it with just a knife is I'm actually just scoring from hole to hole here. Just work my way around like this. And you see I've scored this piece. I have a little rectangle here. And I can just continue to keep scoring that plywood all the way around. Sometimes I can push a little bit harder, make it go deeper into that wood. Going across the grain is the trickiest. And work your way around and just be patient. And eventually you'll be able to get all the way through that wood, and you'll be able to get that rectangular piece out of there. Okay, working my way around that edge on both sides. I was able to cut out that rectangular spot there. And I can clean up the edges in here. But now, at least this firewall, when that motor's mounted to it, you see that motor is not going to interfere. Motor's not going to interfere with the firewall. It's not going to rub. Okay? So let's move on to the next step. What we need to do now is cut out these last remaining pieces. So on this firewall, you see there are these rectangles. We need to cut those out and then pop out these little circles. And then also these gussets, or whatever you want to call them, these pieces need to be cut out as well, because they're going to mount onto the firewall. So I'll cut those out and be back in a minute. Okay, I've got all my pieces cut out. Here's that firewall, and you see those 4 rectangles are cut out. And then these gusset pieces are cut out. And what you want to do is test fit them. Now, put these gussets on the opposite side of the little teeny circles, because those are going to be nice to keep on the outside of the airplane so that it'll be easier to mount the motor. So put the gussets on this side. Now you might need to trim them a little bit to make sure that they fit in there. But we're going to dry fit everything first. You see how I have everything mounted in there. I have the circle, in this case, up, away from, how the triangle goes this way. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is test fit it into this piece here. Okay, everything looks like it fits there nicely. And then finally I'm going to dry fit it into the airplane, make sure that fits. Okay, it looks like it fits perfectly. You want to make sure you have a mistake if any of these firewall edges are sticking off the side of the airplane, or if it doesn't fit as nicely as it does here. Okay, see, get you another orientation. This is up, this is the top of the airplane. Last thing we're gonna do is just a precaution. So if you take this foam shaped like a U and a piece of scrap foam, put the scrap foam on like this, and then you can we basically want to trace the inside edge here. I want to cut out a secondary firewall, and I'll show you why in a minute here. This is just an extra piece of scrap foam. I'm going to cut it all the way through. And what I'm going to do is, there's the firewall again. I'm just going to glue it in place here. You see, just behind those gussets. You can even do it at an angle if you want. The reason I want to do this is because, once again, with this motor, with the shaft sticking through the back, I want to make sure that anything you put in the front of the airplane, like for example, if you've got your speed controller in there and maybe it shifts forward a little bit, or if you got a bundle of wires in here, that they don't start rubbing against that shaft. So we're just gonna glue in a secondary firewall here. Like I said, if I just glue it in like this, put it in place, glue it in like this, then there's no way that shaft is going to be rubbing on anything. All right. So we can go ahead and start to glue all these pieces now. Just go one at a time. We'll glue those gusset pieces on there. We can test that they're the right width. Yep, they are. We'll let those cure a bit. And we'll go ahead, put some glue all the way around this part here. Put glue on both sides of the gussets. Slide that in place. I'll press it down like this. Once again, let gravity work for us. Hold that in place. And then finally, I'll just glue in that gusset piece. And that's what that power pod looks like now. And the way everything will mount together, once again, is like this. And then the motor wires will go through that hole, and the motor will be mounted like this. Let's set up the motor to mount in your power pod. Things you're going to need here are the motor, Phillips screwdriver, your 1.5 millimeter hex key, and then these are some of the parts that come inside your motor. There's the mount that you've seen before. This is the prop shaft, the black one with the large shaft on it. There are 3 hex screws and 4 panhead screws. Okay, let's go ahead and mount the motor mount to the motor first. So if you look on the back side of the motor, the silver side, there are 4 holes here. And those 4 holes will line up with the 4 holes here on the back of the motor mount. Now you notice on this motor mount, there is a side where they're countersunk. This side, they're not countersunk. Okay, so this is the side that the panhead screws are going to go into, so they're flush. So that's going to mount onto the motor just like this. Now make sure you rotate it around until those holes line up. There's only 2 orientations. There are 4 holes, but there are only 2 orientations where they line up. There you go. So I'm going to go ahead and drop in those 4 screws and use the Phillips screwdriver. Okay, I have those 4 screws. You see they're flush with the mount. So now we can go to the prop shaft side. Okay, so here's the prop shaft. And this just sits right on top, and there are 3 holes. And they're hex. So what you're going to do is, using your hex key, you're going to screw in these 3 mounting screws. Okay, I've got those screws in there, and I just tighten them down with the 1.5 millimeter hex key. And now your motor is all ready to be mounted. And so the final step here is to go ahead and feed the 3 leads through the firewall. And we can leave a little loop like this. If you look from the side, when I mount this, I don't want to have it pushing up against one of the sides, because the whole purpose of me cutting that center section out was to keep that prop shaft from rubbing up against the motor. So you've got plenty of slack in this wire, so you can actually have it loop up a bit. And then what we're going to do is screw these mounts into those small holes that were laser cut into the firewall. I have some number 2 thread cutting screws that I went ahead and started off camera. Just started them into those holes that were laser cut into the firewall. And what I'm going to do is just tighten each one of these down. And as I'm tightening them down, I'm looking through the back here, and I just want to make sure that shaft or the ring around it doesn't rub against any part of the firewall. So I'll go ahead and tighten everything down. You need to go finger tight on these, but don't go bear down on them so much that you strip out the firewall, because it is just plywood, thin plywood. Go around a couple of times. And it looks like I've got no interference with that shaft. And so now my power pod is complete. This next part is optional, but it'll allow you to make your power pod removable. That's nice when you're first working with the airplane, to be able to pull it out, pull the power pod out, install the different components, change them out, work on them, so forth. What you may prefer to do when you get close to competition time, though, is actually, once you've got everything working well, is actually glue the power pod into the airplane, and you'll have a more rigid forward fuselage section. You'll have to cut it away, however, if you ever want to get back in there. But it is nice when you're first testing out the airplane, flight testing it and so forth, to be able to remove this power pod. And the way you do that is use this skewer that you're provided with in the kit. Mark about an inch back from the firewall and in the middle of the vertical component of the fuselage. Hold the firewall back because it's got some slop in it. So hold that. I'll try to do this in a way that you can see what I'm doing. Hold the firewall back, and then trying to be as level as you can, plunge the skewer as you're twisting it. You're sort of using it to drill. You're going right through the side of the fuselage. Do it slowly so you don't bend the fuselage. Try to keep it as level as possible. And you see it penetrated the other side. And now what you're going to do is push it almost all the way through. Give yourself about 1/8 of an inch or so of it sticking out on this side, and then go ahead and mark it about 1/8 of an inch off of this side. And then what we're going to do is cut it. And the easiest way to cut it is to just use your knife and press down and roll. That'll put a stress concentration in it so you can just gently break it away. And now you can stick this back in the fuselage, and now you have a removable power pod. For this next part, I'm going to make some modifications to the kit, and you can make some modifications to my modifications. But what I want to do is prep the fuselage to make a hatch, a top hatch, so I can get the battery. Cut a smaller inlet for some airflow, because with the systems we're using, we don't need a large inlet. And also, because the rules require an external way to connect and disconnect the battery for safety, also marked a couple of spots to put the wire connectors that come out of the fuselage. Now, you can modify this yourself, but I'll just show you the dimensions that I used, and you can stop the video or pause the video and take a look at these dimensions. And then on the side, okay, once I've got those marked, What I'm going to do, because I'm not going to use the provided cutout, I'm actually going to inject some glue into the cutout. And then just scrape that excess off. Then what I'm going to do is use some packing tape and have it start right at about where my hatch starts. I don't want it to go too far down the fuselage because I need to glue on the wing later and it won't glue to packing tape. So you can see my packing tape starts here and it's going to end back here, and I can cut this off with the knife. This packing tape is actually going to serve as my hinge for my hatch. Once again, you can see why it's nice we didn't put the vertical stab on, because I can come on the sides here and cut the excess tape off. I can do that on both sides. Next step is I'm going to cut out this little triangle here that's just going to serve as a small air inlet for my speed controller and battery. I'm going to cut out all the way around on this fuselage hatch, and then I'm going to cut out rectangles where I've got these two dots. I've cut out the service hatch here that'll allow you to get your battery in and out, and I've cleaned up the edges so you see it still fits into that spot there. And then here's the triangle piece I cut out, cleaned up the edges to make sure some air can get in there. Now on the side of the fuselage, what we're going to do is cut out some holes that will fit your battery cables, okay? So cut out a couple of rectangles that are about the size of this XT30 connector. Okay, I've cut out a couple of exit slots so that the XT30 connector can get in and out. They'll be coming from the inside out, like you saw in the first part of the video. Okay, so now let's work on the top hatch some more. This hatch, if we were to just put a hinge on it right now, the problem is that it could fall through, and that would really get annoying. Okay, so what we have to do is put a stopper on the inside of this, and I like to put one on each side. So I just cut out two pieces of scrap foam. They're about 1 inch by 1/2 inch, and I'm just going to glue them right underneath the front and the back part of this hatch so that they're just sticking out a little bit. Okay, so I'll put just a little bit of glue here on the front part of this one. Have it stick out maybe 1/8 inch or so. Doesn't need to be much. Then I'll do the same for the front part. Just a little bit needs to be sticking out there. Now that the glue is hardened, I can test fit my hatch again. You see, it's now flush and it has something to serve as a stopper. So you have a nice flush outer part of the fuselage. So what I need to do now is I'm going to put another strip of tape on the top here to reinforce it and also to serve as my hinge. And if you'd like to, if you think that, if you're concerned about the paper coming off near the holes here, you can reinforce these with a little bit of glue and scrape out the excess. I've reapplied the tape and scored just along these 3 edges to cut through the tape. Don't go across here or you'll be doing tape one more time. But this piece of tape serves as your hinge. So now you won't be able to reach your finger in and pop it out when the wing is on, so I'll show you how you typically do it. If you've got just a little bit of a fingernail, you can grab that edge and pop that hatch open. But if you're not able to catch your fingernail into this edge, what you could also do is take your knife and cut yourself just a little half-moon finger hole or finger notch there, so you can get just the tip of your finger there in there and pop the hatch open. It's not going to hurt you in terms of drag. Okay, so the forward part of this fuselage is ready. So let's start working on the installation of the remaining internal components. Before we put in the remaining avionics and bond on the wing, let's do one more thing before the wing and the tail are on, since it's still easy to work on the bottom of the airplane. The bottom of the airplane will rub against the grass or asphalt or whatever you're ending up landing on. And so it's nice to have some reinforcement. So take a strip of that packing tape and put a strip all the way on the bottom of the airplane from the front to back. And like I showed you before, lay the strip down, flip the fuselage over, and then use the edge of the fuselage as a guide to cut off the tape. And that'll give you a nice reinforcement on the bottom of the fuselage. It'll make the airplane last longer before you have to make repairs. Here's the final avionics installation and check before we button everything up. You'll recognize here we've got your electronic speed controller and the receiver. The connections are the same as we did earlier. Aileron Y is in channel 1. Elevator will be in channel 2. Throttle will be in channel 3. I've got the battery here and the power pack. So what we're going to do first is fish the speed controller through this opening, and you've got the 3 connections, and go ahead and make those bullet connections to the motor. Okay, your ailerons connect back into the Y. So we'll go ahead and just make the connections and then figure out if they're right in a minute here, because we can easily swap them at this point. And then finally, we've got to move the receiver back here so it'll reach the elevator servo, which is now permanently inside the fuselage. Remember, that goes into channel 2. And remember, the ground is on the outside, so the black wire is on the outside. Okay, everything's connected except for the battery. And we're going to make sure that the transmitter is off. Let's just check our speed controller. Here is the XT30 connector for the speed controller. This is what you made the hole in the side of the fuselage for. So we'll just push that through. Okay, now before we connect the receiver battery, you always want to have your transmitter on first. Okay, so remember that in terms of a checklist. Transmitter is the first thing on and the last thing off. So if you're turning on your airplane, you turn on the transmitter, then you plug in the battery. When you're turning off your airplane, you unplug your battery, then you turn off your transmitter. Turn the transmitter on, and I connect the battery. You hear that beep? That's actually in the motor. What's making that noise is the motor. And now, depending on how you have your radio set up, you may hear the motor is continuing to emit a series of beeps. The beeps mean something. In this case, the beeps mean that you're in a programming mode for the speed controller. And we don't need to do any programming for the speed controller, but it actually tells us something else. The way you get into this programming mode is full throttle, and our throttle is all the way back. So what that means is that the throttle channel needs to be reversed. So I'll show you how to do that next. To reverse the channel, unplug the receiver, turn off the transmitter, and turn it on its back. This transmitter, you reverse a channel manually with a series of dip switches. Remember, throttle is on channel 3, and so the dip switch is here. You count from the left side, 1, 2, 3, and you can just use a screwdriver and just gently throw that switch to the other direction until it clicks. You can see that one channel that's different than the others. Okay. That means we've reversed the throttle channel. Okay, let's go ahead and turn everything back on. Once again, transmitter, always transmitter first. Then plug in the receiver. You hear those series of tones? Once again, those series of tones are emitted by a high frequency that's sent to the motor. It's actually the motor making that sound. There's no speaker. Okay, but now that we reverse that channel, we see it works properly. When the throttle is all the way back, usually these speed controllers have safeties in them, and they won't let you start at full throttle. But don't trust that. There could be a malfunction. All right. So first thing we're going to check is the motor spinning the right direction? So we'll take the motor. I'm going to hold it so that you can see it. If I throttle up, you notice the motor is spinning. Sometimes it's hard to tell which way it's going. But in this case, it's going relative to the pilot, relative to me, it's going clockwise, which is correct. Now, if you end up having yours go the opposite direction, if the motor is spinning the wrong way, you can't change the direction with the transmitter. You have to change it at the speed controller, and it's really easy to do. Just change any two of these connectors. So let's say that this thing was spinning counterclockwise from the pilot's perspective right now and I wanted to switch it. I might just switch the black and the white wire, or the black and the red, or the white and the red. Switching any two of these will change the direction. I can actually show you that right now. Now it's spinning the opposite way. I understand it's hard for you to tell, but I can see it. It's spinning this way now. I want it to spin this way. Okay? So we just lucked out. It doesn't always work out that the manufacturer colors match and make it spin the way you want to, especially if you're doing a pusher versus a tractor propeller and so forth. Okay, so our motor is working. Now let's check the servos. Okay, ailerons are the right stick, and I move them left and right. Okay, let me move the wing into a position you can see it better. Actually, you might be able to see it better this way. If I move the stick to the right, that means I want to command a right roll. So that means this starboard aileron needs to go up. That forces the wing down. And the port aileron goes down. So let's see if that's correct. Oh, it is. Okay. We lucked out there. That's a left turn. That's a right turn. If this was wrong at this point, if you had them backwards, there are two things you could do. You could swap these connectors at the Y, or you could reverse the aileron channel inside the radio like I just showed you for the throttle channel. All right, let's check the elevator. Need to move this so you can see the elevator. For an elevator, when I pull back on the on the right stick, if I pull back on the elevator, it should make the nose go up. It means that the trailing edge of the elevator needs to go up. Oh, that's backwards. You see, if I push forward, it goes up, and if I pull back, it goes down. That means the elevator channel is reversed. So I need to go through the procedure that I did before, disconnect the receiver, turn off the transmitter, open up the radio, and remember, elevator was on channel 2. So I need to make channel 2 the channel 2 dip switch. I need to push up. So the throttle channel and the elevator channel are both reversed. Close everything up. Turn on the transmitter first. Plug in the battery. Okay. That's the all green or all go with the motor. It says everything is good. Sometimes if you have the throttle advanced a little bit when you turn on the radio, it'll just keep beeping. It'll warn you, hey, pull the throttle back. All right, let's check the elevator. When I pull back, it goes up now. And when I push forward, it goes down. So it's doing what it's supposed to do. So all of our controls are properly working, so we can do the final assembly of the airplane now. Let's put all the remaining components in the airplane. I've got a strip of Velcro here, both sides. And on the fuzzy side, I'm going to pull off the backing. And I'm going to attach it to the back of the receiver. Now you you still have the backing on the loop side. Okay, so this is not sticky. So I got to get the receiver inside here. So I opened up this vent here and I made it like a little hatch so I'd have some better access. Now go ahead and push the receiver back inside here. Actually, what I've decided to do for this particular receiver is actually go ahead and put it on the bottom of the fuselage. So it actually works out nicely. So I've taken the backing off of the loop part of the Velcro, and I'm gonna push it back here, holding it up off the bottom of the fuselage. You probably won't be able to see this until I'm done. Move it back here until those servo connections are underneath the hatch, and then I'll push that down. Hopefully you can see that. You see the receiver down in there? The antenna is sitting out this way. It's nice, the antenna will be out of the way of everything. And wanted to make sure that none of the wires get bunched up and tangled into the elevator servo back here. So this is a nice place to be able to access this receiver. You can still get in there and pull it out if you need to, and cover up that hatch. And then we can start loading up the other components. You can move in the wires for the power pod. You're gonna fight with them a little bit. This is what's nice about having this forward hatch, is that I can get inside here and pull the wires on that speed controller a little bit, get a little bit better access. Push that motor back in, then move the speed controller back forward. I can put I can put the rod back through the power pod to hold it in place. Okay. And I can get those wires neatened up in here a little bit. We can rearrange it as needed after we get the wing on. Okay. So now what I've done for the wing is made a mark 5 inches back, 5 inches back from the front of the foam. That's where the leading edge of the wing's going to be. I also measured halfway across the fuselage at this point, and that's 15/16. And that's going to be the center line of the wing. You notice I've made 2 center line marks on the wing itself as well. This one we already know where it is because there's a point on this piece of foam. So I've marked that, and then I made the mark go up the foam a little bit. The front one I measured with respect to the rectangular part of the bottom of the wing. And that is 10 3/8 inches over from this point here. And put a mark here. So now what I can do, oh, one more thing I wanted to show you. If you noticed before, you can kind of see the green and red pieces of tape. I forgot to mention, but you can look back in the video, I actually taped over the servo connections where they connect into the Y. And that's usually good practice for servo connections. When you're working in here, sometimes things get pulled and those servo connections can come out. So I used some tape and taped those together. I made them green and red so you can see them. Okay, and I fold the wires in here. And I can set the wing on the fuselage. And it'll be difficult for you to see this, but I have that leading edge lined up here. And then I need to make a mark back here at the trailing edge so I know where to put the midpoint. Okay, back here. And it just so happens that the midpoint of this is 7/8. So I'll make the cross point at 7/8. Now I can fold the wires in there. And as always, we're always dry fitting everything. Okay. Make sure the wing is all the way down. And basically go around, take a look at the airplane from the top and from the front, and make sure you didn't make any mistakes, because the next step is going to be, we're going to glue this wing down, and once we do that, it'd be very difficult to peel it back up. Let's glue the wing down. Last chance to double check all your measurements. I can see here where I'm going to apply the glue. I won't apply any glue past my aft mark or past my forward mark. And I'll go all the way around here with the glue and then line it up quickly. Okay, pull those servo wires down so they're not in the way, and then quickly line up that trailing edge and the leading edge. And keep double checking it. So I got it in place, I'm going to hold it. Be careful, because sometimes when you're pushing down, it's sort of floating on the glue and it can shift on you. So just keep checking it. And we'll hold this for a couple minutes. The glue is hardened, so we're going to flip the airplane over. And you may be able to see there's some small gaps where the wing meets the fuselage. And so we're going to put a little bit of glue in there just to provide some additional reinforcement. And as always, we'll just put a bead of glue in there and wipe it out with some foam. Wipe the excess. I can't get back behind the servo, but that's okay. Wipe that out there. Wipe the excess here. And then we'll do it to the other side as well. Now that all the rest of the structure is done, we can put the vertical tail on, because it's not going to be in our way anymore. We don't need to keep flipping the airplane upside down to work on it. So you see this tab is going to insert into the horizontal stab like that. Make sure you have your square. And I'm going to put a bead of glue in the bottom here and up the sides. I don't need to put any glue here because there's a hole there. Just need it here and up the side. And once again, it'll be a pretty good amount because this foam is cupped here. ready with your, got a little bit of excess, so I can wipe that off. And then get your square in place. And just hold it until the glue hardens. Just to make sure it's a strong connection, I'm going to run beaded glue in each corner here. You might call that a fillet bond. And then, like usual, I'll run the beaded glue in there and then scrape the excess off with my scrap foam. Put a bead of glue in the front here. And then run one down the side here. And then down the other side. And then scrape off the excess. I was able to rearrange some things in the forward part of the fuselage here with the ESC. Plenty of room now to get in there for the battery. And what I want to do now is it'll help you when you need to arm your airplane. I'm going to glue this connector to the outside of the airplane in place. And I'm gluing the round side up. Round is ground in the case of XT connectors. And so what I'm going to do is put a bead of glue on the back of this connector and push it up against the side of the fuselage and just hold it in place there. Before we can CG the airplane, we need to put the propeller on. Now what I've got here is a propeller, some adapters, one of the prop shaft nuts. This is a washer, prop nut or spinner nut, and then a wrench and the 1.5 millimeter hex key. Now, these propellers are designed to go on a lot of different types of shafts. What you'll notice, if you just put this propeller on, there's a lot of slop, okay? You can't mount it like this. It'll be unbalanced. That's why they give you these adapters. So what you need to do is slide each one of these adapters onto the shaft until you find one where it slides on perfectly with no slop. In my case, it's this middle one. So I'm just going to break it away. And then you see on the back side of the propeller, there's a space there, and you can just squeeze that adapter in. Now the propeller will slide on without any slop. By the way propellers are specified is their diameter, which is tip to tip, and then something called their pitch. In this case, the diameter is 6 inches, and the pitch is 5.5 inches. The pitch is an indication of how steep the blade is twisted into the flow, oncoming flow. Think of it as almost like threads on a screw. You know, some threads are fine and you have to turn them a lot to move forward. Some threads are very coarse. You could consider this to be a coarse pitch. In other words, it's a type of pitch that if you think of the propeller as a screw, imagine if you were going to put this in a bowl of Jello or something, and you turn this propeller one time, one rotation, it would pull itself through that Jello 5.5 inches. In other words, its pitch. So the pitch of a propeller is analogous to the pitch of a screw. Okay? For This type of application for the setup we have, usually a relatively large pitch is good for pylon racing. It depends on a lot of different things, so we recommend that you try some different propellers, do some experiments to see what gives you the fastest lap times. We don't want to give you what we think is the optimum propeller, because it takes some of that enjoyment away from you in terms of that doing some scientific experiments to optimize yourself. Okay, we're going to put this propeller on. The next thing to go on is this washer. Now typically the washer, it's got sort of a conical side and a flat side. Usually the flat side would go against the propeller. Problem is that the pitch is so high on some of these propellers, it won't fit. So it actually works out nice. Put the conical side towards the propeller. Then you put on the regular nut provided by the motor company. And then what you can do is hold on to the propeller and tighten that down. I'm kind of holding on to the outside of the motor as I'm tightening down that propeller nut. And then one more, this prop nut will serve as a jam nut, and it also provides some additional safety if you bump it into yourself or something. The front end of this airplane, you're walking around or moving it or something, you've got a nice smooth edge. And so you take your 1.5 millimeter hex key, put it through there and tighten it. Okay, so now you have your propeller mounted. Now this airplane is dangerous. Okay, as we talked about earlier, propellers are like spinning knives, especially electric propellers, because the way electric motor works, its job in life is to spin at the same RPM no matter what the load is. So if you stick your finger into the plane of this propeller, the motor is not just going to stop. The motor is going to keep pushing harder and harder until it cuts through your finger or until it burns itself up. Okay, so you treat an airplane with a propeller on it like a loaded weapon. So you notice I don't have the battery in this propeller, or I'm sorry, in this airplane right now. So you see that's the last step we need to do, is place the battery. And we're going to place the battery based on where the center of gravity needs to be in the airplane. The very last thing we need to do is CG the airplane. CG means center of gravity. The center of gravity location of the airplane is very important. If it's in the wrong place, the airplane can be unstable at worst. It might just be difficult to fly for the pilot, and that's if you've got your CG too far aft or back. If the CG is too far forward, you may not be able to get the nose up, and the airplane may not be able to land without hitting its nose on the ground. The rules for the contest say that you've got to have your CG at approximately a quarter chord. What that means is 1/4 of the distance along the wing here. And I have that marked. Okay, so measure this distance, take 1/4 of it, and measure back. Okay, and I did that already. You can see 1 7/16. Okay, I'm going to put a mark on each side. So the easiest way to do this is put your thumb and middle finger on those two dots, and you'll notice I'm not holding the side of the fuselage. but the airplane is wanting to pitch up. You see, that means that the actual CG of this airplane is behind that point right now. So I need to move the CG forward. Well, that's why we haven't put the battery in yet. And what we'll do is just put the battery on the outside of the airplane and see where it needs to go to balance. Looks like right about there. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to get a piece of Velcro, just like we did with the receiver. I like to put the fuzzy side on the battery. That way I'm consistent. I do the same for every battery, so I don't have to worry that if I move one battery from plane to plane, I end up with the wrong type of Velcro side. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to dry fit it first just to show you. Remember, that battery needed to be approximately right here. So I'm going to move the wires out of the way, and what I need to do is to be able to put that battery down right there. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it off camera, and then because it's going to be difficult for you to see with my meaty claws in there anyway. Okay, now can you see what I've done here? I've got the battery Velcroed down to the bottom of the fuselage, and you see it's stuck down there. I can get my finger in there and peel it up to swap the battery if I need to, but it's not going to come out easily. And then what I need to do is run the connector on the outside of the airplane. And so now what I can do, I'm not going to do it right now, is I can arm this from the outside. I'll go get the transmitter and we'll test that everything works. Okay, now I've got my transmitter. Notice my battery's disconnected. And so now this is when it can get dangerous. And this is why we have the teams required to be arming their airplane on the outside. Because you can imagine if we allowed people to have their connectors inside the fuselage, you can imagine you'd get distracted and you get inside here and you start working and you get your hands across the prop line and try to connect things. And that's where it gets really dangerous, okay? Our teams are not allowed to arm their motors, in other words, plug in the battery, until they get out on the flight line. They're also required to use cut-resistant gloves. And the way we do it on the outside of the fuselage, it should help you to be safe. Now, this works for me because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you actually may want to cut your holes on the other side. But let's go ahead and arm the airplane. Remember, transmitter first, then receiver, then to turn off, receiver first, then transmitter. Okay, so now what I'll do, anytime I'm going to arm this, I'm going to treat this like a firearm. Okay, so you keep your hands and face and other people away from that prop curve, or the prop arc. Okay, and so you see with my left hand, I'm holding underneath the fuselage, and with my right hand, I can come across here, and with one hand, I can plug it in. And I don't know if you could hear the beeping, but it's now armed. Okay, you can actually hear the servos. All the servos are moving, and we checked that before. They're moving properly. And let's just carefully bump the throttle and make sure that the prop is working. There it is. this airplane's ready to compete. So good luck, and we look forward to seeing you at Speedfest.